She was already somewhere no human being should be able to survive, locked inside a cage at the bottom of a river. Not a natural cage, not something the water formed around her accidentally. A deliberate cage, built from something darker than iron, in a place that existed below the world most people could see. And every single day since they put her there came to remind her why. She had been there for weeks or months. Time moved differently in a place like that, and she had long since stopped being able to count it. What she had not lost was the memory of exactly how she got there, every detail. The afternoon her neighbor smiled at her and said, "Come, let me show you the secret." The walk through the quiet road at dusk, the river that should not have existed. The moment she swallows the water and the world changed. She had replayed it so many times in that cage that the memory had worn smooth like a stone handled too often. And the one thing she could not stop thinking about, the one thing that sat heavier in her chest than everything else, was that she had walked into all of it with her own 2 feet. Because she wanted to know why her neighbor's food shop had more customers than hers. That was all. That was how it started. My name is Jessie, your narrator, and this is the story of Ngozi, a woman who nearly lost everything because she made the mistake that has destroyed people since the beginning of time. She looked at what her neighbor had and forgot to protect what she has already possessed. The street was called Okafor Lane, right in the middle of Onitsha, pressed between other streets, loud in the morning, louder by afternoon. The kind of streets where everybody knows everybody and nobody is minding their own business, and the smell of someone's cooking starts before 7 and does not stop until after 9 at night. 2 women had their food store side by side on that street. They had been there for years, long enough that the regulars could not remember a time before either of them. The first woman was Ngozi, 38 years old, a widow with 2 children in secondary school. She had built her food business from a small pot and a borrowed table into a small store with a canopy and plastic chair and a menu written in her own neat handwriting. She cooked with love, and that sounds like a small thing, but it is not a small thing at all. She sourced her tomato herself. She ground her pepper fresh every morning. She never reheats yesterday's stock. She tasted everything before it left her pot. She had the specific pride of a woman who understands that her food was her name and her name was worth protecting. Her food was genuinely excellent. Anyone who had eaten from her store would tell you this without being asked. The second woman, Chioma, she had appeared on Okafor Lane about 3 years before our story begins. Nobody remembered exactly when. She was just suddenly there one morning, with her store already set up and her pot on the fire, as though she had always been there and everyone had simply not noticed her until now. Pleasant woman, quiet in the way some people are quiet, not unfriendly, just contained, like someone who keeps most of themselves somewhere you cannot see. She cooked the same thing Ngozi cooked: rice, beans, stew, soup, standard food store menu. And from her very first week, customers came. Not a few, not gradually. From the very first week, they came in numbers that made no sense. By 7:30 in the morning, people were already waiting at Chioma's store before she had finished setting up, as though they had woken up that morning already knowing they needed to be there. By noon, the line stretched past 3 other stores. People who ate there once came back the next day, and the day after. Some came every single day. Some came twice in one day. A handful of the most devoted started helping her, washing plates, arranging chairs, fetching water for her pots, not because she asked, because they felt a pull towards that store that they could not explain and did not question. Ngozi watched all of this from her small store 3 feet away while she sat alone. The first thing Ngozi did was buy her neighbor's food and taste it. She sat at her own empty store on a Wednesday afternoon with a plate of Chioma's rice and stew, and she ate slowly and carefully, with the focused attention of someone conducting a serious investigation. She thought. She took another spoonful and thought some more. The food was fine, perfectly fine, competent, properly seasoned, nothing wrong with it. But it was not better than hers. She was not saying this out of bias. She was saying it because she has spent 20 years developing the kind of palate that can identify the difference between good food and food, the way a musician can hear the difference between a competent performance and a transcendent one. Chioma's food was good. Ngozi's food was better. She was certain of it, and yet she looked up from that plate at her neighbor's store 3 feet away, where 8 people were eating and 2 more were waiting, and then looked at her own 4 empty chairs, and the distance between those 2 realities felt like a wall she could not find the door in. She bought Chioma's food 4 more times over the following week. Rice, beans, pepper soup, fried plantain. Every time she compared it to her own version of the same thing. Every time she came to the same conclusion. Her food was better. And every time she arrived at the same conclusion, the line at Chioma's store was exactly where it had always been. She started asking questions of the other traders on the streets, of the woman who sold drink 2 stores down and forgot nothing. Why do people go to Chioma's stores instead of mine? She asked. Her food is just something about it, people said. You know how some places have that thing. You don't know why you keep going back, but you keep going back. That thing. Nobody could name it. Nobody could describe it. They all felt it and none of them could explain it. Ngozi sat with this for a long time. She prayed about it. She was a woman of deep faith, and she brought everything to God first. She prayed for her business, for understanding, for her children's school fees that were coming, and the customers who were not. Nothing changed. The line at Chioma's store remained. The chairs at Ngozi's stores remained empty. Until one afternoon, she looked at her neighbor serving her 12th customer of the day and decided she was going to ask directly. The first time she asked Chioma directly was a Tuesday evening when the last customer had gone and they were both packing up. She walked the 3 feet between their stores and said it plainly because Ngozi was not a woman who knew how to be indirect about things that mattered to her. She said, Chioma, I want to ask you something and I need you to know I am asking as a neighbor and not as a competitor. We are both women trying to feed our children from the streets. I am not asking to copy you. I am asking because I genuinely do not understand. What is your secret? She said. Why do people come to your store the way they come? I cook the same food. I have been here longer than you. My food is good. But you have 20 customers to my 3 every day and I cannot understand why. Chioma smiled. That pleasant smile that gave nothing away. There is no secret, she said. I cook and people come. And she finished packing and left. Ngozi tried again 2 weeks later, brought a bag of her best tomato as a gift, placed them on Chioma's table before trading started, and when Chioma thanked her, Ngozi asked again, Please. There is nothing to tell, Chioma said. Some business move and some do not. That is just how it is. On the 3rd attempt, Ngozi came on a Friday evening after the street had gone quiet and did something she had never done before in her adult life. She begged. Not on her knees, not dramatically, just in the raw, honest way of a woman who has run out of pride to hide anymore. She said, Chioma, I have 2 children in secondary school. Their fees are due next month. I know how to cook. I am not a lazy woman, but something is happening that I do not understand, and it's affecting my life and my children's life, and I am asking you, please, woman to woman, if there is anything you can tell me, anything at all. Chioma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You really want to know? Yes, Ngozi said, please. Chioma folded her tablecloth slowly, taking her time as though she was making a decision and the folding was giving her space to make it. Then she said, I cannot tell you here. I will show you. This Saturday after we close, I will take you somewhere and you will understand everything. Ngozi felt something move through her in that moment. Not quite relief, not quite excitement, something else. Something cold and brief that came and went so fast she barely registered it. She said, okay. She said, thank you. Then Chioma said, one more thing. Do not tell anyone where we are going, she said. This is between you and me only. Ngozi agreed. She went home and told her children she would be late on Saturday. She did not tell them where she was going, which was the worst decision of her life. Saturday came. They closed their stores as usual. Ngozi had done reasonably well that day. 6 plates. She packed up feeling cautiously hopeful in a way that feels dangerous in retrospect. Chioma came to her side at exactly 6 o'clock. Simple blouse and wrapper. Nothing remarkable. She said, are you ready? Ngozi said yes, and they started walking. At first, the route made sense. Through the familiar parts of the neighborhood, past the provision stores where she buys her seasoning cube every morning, past the mechanic's booker, past the church on the corner where she worshipped every Sunday. Then the street became less familiar, then unfamiliar, then unknown in the way a part of city becomes unknown when no one had reason to go there in a long time and it looked like no one has. The house thinned, the roads changed from cracked concrete to packed earth. The city noise fell behind them and was replaced by specific quiet of a place where human activity has not been recent. Ngozi asked, where are we going? Calm down, Chioma said. We will soon reach. They walked for what felt like 40 minutes, maybe longer. The light was almost gone when they arrived, and what they arrived at made Ngozi stop walking completely. A river. Wide, dark, completely still. Not the river that ran at the edge of Onitsha that everyone knew. Not any river Ngozi had ever mentioned in all her years in that city. No development on its bank, no boats, no women washing clothes, no children, no evidence that any living person had ever had reason to come there. The water was so dark it looked less like water and more like a hole in the earth that had filled with something. Completely silent. Not the silence of still water, the silence of something deliberately not making a sound. The silence of something listening. Ngozi said, this is where we are going. Chioma said, the secret is in this river. We are going to enter the water. Ngozi said she could not swim. Chioma said it did not matter. When you enter the water, open your mouth and swallow the first water that comes in. Just once. After that, you will breathe normally, even underwater. Ngozi looked at her neighbor. She should have asked more questions. She should have asked how that was possible. She should have asked why a food business secret required entering a dark river at dusk in a part of the city that felt like it existed outside the normal rules of things. But the specific hunger of a woman who had been watching her business fail for 3 years while her children's school fees loom is a powerful thing. It quiets the questions that should be loudest. Chioma stepped into the water, walked forward without hesitation. The water rose to her waist, her chest, her neck. Then she was gone beneath the surface. No struggle, no splash, simply gone, as though the river had been expecting her. Ngozi stood at the bank. Every sensible part of her was shouting. She stepped into the water. The cold hit her first. River water cold, but deeper than that. The kind of cold that comes from somewhere below temperature, below the physical world entirely. She was sinking and fighting it, and the water was in her mouth, and she remembered what Chioma had said. Swallow. Every instinct said no. Everything her body knew about surviving said close your throat and fight back to the surface. But the surface was already far above her, and she was going down fast. She swallowed, and the words changed. The panic stopped, not gradually, immediately, like it switched. Her lungs opened and breathed, and what they breathed felt like air. Not water, air. Cold and full and completely sustaining. She was still underwater. She could see the dark water around her. But her body had stopped registering it as something to be survived and had simply begun functioning as though the rules of the surface world did not apply down there. Chioma was beside her. She pointed downward. We are going deeper. Ngozi looked down. Below her, the water continued for a distance that should not have been possible given how shallow this river had appeared from the bank. And far, far below, very far below. Light. Not sunlight, not any natural light, something cold and bluish and steady, like a city seen from an airplane at night. They descended. And as they went deeper, Ngozi saw things that her mind kept trying to reject and kept being forced to accept. Structures, buildings, actual buildings arranged along what could only be described as streets, not rings, not ancient things. Functioning structure with light in their windows and movement around their entrance. A market. She could see it clearly as they passed above it. Stores in rows, figures moving between them. The exact layout of a surface market translated into this impossible underwater space. The figures they passed, moving through the market, standing outside the structure. Ngozi could not look at their faces for too long. Not because they were monstrous, because they were almost right, almost human, almost ordinary, almost like the people on Okafor Lane or in her church or in any market in Onitsha. Almost. And the almost was the most frightening thing she had ever seen in her life. Then they reached the palace. It was a palace in the way that the word palace contains everything that word implies, and then multiplies it by something that has no name. Vast, cold, built from material that had no equivalent on the surface of the earth. The walls alive with slow movement, the ceiling disappearing into the dark water above, and at the far end of the throne room, she was sitting. Ngozi would spend the rest of her life trying to describe what she saw on that throne and never find adequate language for it. Beautiful was one word, but the wrong kind. The kind that makes you instinctively aware of danger, the way the beautiful marking on certain snake makes you step back without deciding to. Old was another word, but insufficient. This was not the age of a person or a generation. This was the age of something that had existed before the river, before the city above it, before the land itself had a name. She looked at Ngozi, and Ngozi understood with total certainty, in the specific place in the body where true understanding lives, that she was in the presence of something that was not human and had never been human and had no interest in pretending otherwise. Then the queen spoke, not to Chioma, to Ngozi. So she said, her voice was the sound of deep water, of pressure, of something that moved through other things rather than around them. You are the one whose prayer have been tearing through my kingdom like a blade, she said. Every morning, every night, bind this, cast that, I destroy every evil agenda. She laughed with the laugh of something that has seen a great deal and is really surprised. Do you know how many years your prayer has been disturbing us? She said. Do you know what your mouth has been doing to this place every time you open it in that church of yours? Ngozi's mind was trying to process several things simultaneously. The fact that she was breathing at the bottom of the river. The fact that the entire kingdom knew about her prayer life. The fact that Chioma was standing to the side of all this with an expression of complete calm. The calm made sense now. She looked at Chioma. Chioma looked back, with the specific look of someone who has completed an assignment. Ngozi said, "Who are you?" Chioma smiled, that pleasant smile that gave nothing away. And the queen on the throne said, "She is my daughter. I sent her to find you. I sent her to become your neighbor. I sent her to build the kind of business that would make a woman like you curious enough to follow her somewhere she should not go. It took 3 years, but she found the right door. Your prayer," she said, "your faith, your gods that you call on every morning and every night has been costing me. You are here now," she said. "You will stay." And the guards came. They put her in a cage, not a human cage, something built from materials that belong to this world and nowhere else. Dark and cold and permanent in a way that human-made things really are. She did not eat what they brought her. She had no way of knowing what eating in this place would do to her ability to return to the surface, and she was not willing to find out. She had no way of measuring time. The cold blue-green light of the underwater kingdom did not change with day or night. It simply was, constant and indifferent. Every period that felt like a day to her body came. What they did when they came, I will not describe in details. The details belong to Ngozi and her alone. What I will tell you is that it was designed to break something in her. That specific thing in a person that allows them to believe that what they are experiencing is not permanent. The part that says this will end, help is coming. They wanted that part gone. And after enough time in a place like that, a person can feel it going, can start to feel the erosion of things that has always been the source of everything else in them, their faith. But here is what they had not fully calculated when they chose Ngozi. They brought her here because her prayer were destroying their kingdom. Because her specific brand of faith was the kind that went through walls. What they had not considered was that the same faith that went through walls on the surface did not stop working simply because it was now at the bottom of a river. In that cage, in the dark, with no voice because she was afraid to speak, with no hand raised because her hands were bounded, Ngozi prayed. Silently, with everything she had left after everything they had taken, in the way that prayer works when there is nothing else left, when it is no longer a religious practice or a Sunday morning exercise, when it is the last thing between you and the end of yourself. She prayed, and above the water, the world was already looking for her. Her children noticed first. Adana was 17 and Emeka was 15, and they had come home from a Saturday afternoon to find the house empty and their mother's phone on the kitchen table. She had left her phone. That was the first wrong thing. Ngozi did not go anywhere without her phone. This was as reliable a fact as the sunrise. The idea of her leaving it behind voluntarily was not something her children could fit into any version of reality they know. They called everyone, her mother, her sister, her church friends, the other traders on Okafor Lane. Nobody had seen her since she closed her store Saturday evening. They went to the streets. Chioma's store was also closed. As the days passed and Ngozi did not come home, Chioma also did not return, as though both women had stepped off the edge of the world at exactly the same moment. The family reported it to the police. The police came, asked questions, wrote things down. The drink seller 2 stores down, who forgot nothing, told them she had seen Ngozi leave with Chioma on Saturday evening. The traders talked about Chioma, about how nobody really knew where she lived, how in 3 years on that street nobody had ever seen her arrive from any consistent direction, how she had never mentioned family or a home or a church or anything of details that accumulates naturally around a person living an ordinary life. The police wrote it all down. It did not help them find Ngozi. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Adana stopped sleeping properly. Emeka became very quiet. The specific quiet of a 15-year-old boy who does not know how to carry what he is carrying and has not yet found anyone to help him. Ngozi's sister came to stay. And one Sunday morning, she went to the church. She sat in the front row after the service and waited for the pastor, and she told him everything. Pastor Emmanuel Obi was 61 years old, 35 years in ministry. He had seen many things. He had prayed for the sick and watched them recover. He had sat with people in the deepest darkness of their life. He had also encountered things in those 35 years that had no natural explanation. He did not talk about those things often, but he did not pretend they had not happened. He listened to Ngozi's sister tell him everything: the disappearance, the neighbor, the Saturday evening, the phone on the table, 3 weeks with no word. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. Was Ngozi a woman who prayed consistently? Yes, the sister said. Every morning before the store, every night before bed, church 3 times a week. One of those people who prayed the way other people breathe. Pastor Emmanuel nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had already begun to suspect. Bring me her photograph, he said. We are going to pray. Not a normal Sunday prayer. 3 days fasting the whole church. The sister looked at him. He said, I have seen this kind of thing before. Not exactly this, but this kind of thing. When a person of genuine faith goes missing without explanation, and there is no logical account of where they went, there is sometimes another kind of explanation. We are going to address that kind of explanation directly. Bring her photograph, he said. Tell her children to come. Tell the church to prepare. We start Tuesday. Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. The church was full. Not just the regular congregation. Word had spread through the network of people who had known Ngozi for years. Traders from Okafor Lane, parents from her children's schools, the web of relationship that a woman built over decades of living consistently in one place. People who had eaten her food, people whose children played with her children, people who had sat on the same church bench for years beside a woman who always arrived on time and sang slightly off key and prayed with her whole body. They came. Pastor Emmanuel stood at the front with Ngozi's photograph enlarged on a stand where everyone could see it. He said, we are not here for a missing person prayer. We are here for spiritual warfare. Wherever our sister is, whatever is holding her, we are going to make that place so uncomfortable that keeping her becomes impossible. We are going to pray until something breaks. He said, open your mouth, and they did. Day 1, the prayer rose from that church and went somewhere, not into the air, through it. The specific directed energy of a large group of people who believed completely in what they are doing and doing it for someone specific they love. Below the water, in the cage, Ngozi felt it. Not heard, felt, like warmth entering a cold place, like pressure releasing, like a rope thrown down into a pit and a person at the bottom feeling it arrive in the dark before they can even see it. She pressed herself against the bar and held on to whatever that feeling was with everything she had. Day 2. In the throne room of the queen, something was different. The figures in the underwater kingdom were moving with unsettlement. Something was being disturbed from outside and could not be shut out. The queen was on her throne, but she was not comfortable on it. She was the way a person is when the sounds they cannot locate will not stop. The prayer was in the water, moving through the underwater kingdom the way sound moved through a structure, through the walls, through the floor, through everything, and wherever it moved, feel cracked. Not visibly, not immediately, but the crack was there. In the cage, Ngozi was praying harder than she had ever prayed in her life. Day 3. The church had been fasting for 2 days. Pastor Emmanuel had not slept. He stood at the front at 4 in the morning of the 3rd day with Ngozi's photograph and the face of her 2 children in the front row, and he prayed with the completeness of a man who has decided he's not stopping until something moves. Every stronghold holding this woman, I pull it down. Every chain holding this woman, I break it now, he said. Every dark kingdom that think it can keep what belongs to God, I say to you this morning, your roof is coming off, he said. Ngozi, come home, he said. Come home now. Below the river, the water shook. The water shook. Not the surface water, the deep water. The water that the underwater kingdom had always existed within. The most permanent and stable thing in this place. It shook. Like a building shakes when something strikes its foundation. The figures in the underwater market stopped moving. The lights in the building flickered. In the throne room, the queen rose from her seat. She had not risen from that seat in longer than anyone in the kingdom could remember. She rose, and she looked upward at the water above her, and her face did something the face of those in her kingdom had never seen before. It showed alarm. The wall of the underwater palace cracked. Fine cracked at first, then wider, then the sound of something that has always been solid discovering it is not as solid as it believed. The figure that served the palace began to run. The underground market emptied. The streets of the underwater city, which had always moved with the calm of a place that knew it was protected, became chaos. And in the cage, the lock broke. Not because someone opened it, because the tin it was made from, which had always been unbreakable, had just found its limit. The bars bent outward. Ngozi looked at the space they had created. Then she moved. She ran through the underwater city, coming apart around her, through streets where the almost right figures were running in every direction except towards her, because they had their own problems now. The thing that had been shaking their world for 3 days was getting louder, and their priority had shifted completely from keeping her to surviving what was happening to everyone else. She ran the way she had moved through that underwater world when she first arrived, following the memory of the routes, the markets, the residential structures, the long ascent upwards. Behind her, the sound of the palace losing its certainty. She did not look back. She had been in a cage. She had been in the dark. She had been in pain for what felt like months. She was not looking back. She found the path upward and she went up. The water pressed against her as she rose, fighting her. The boundary between the underwater world and the ordinary world pushing back against her, crossing it in reverse. She pushed harder. She thought about Adanna. She thought about Emeka. She pushed through. And she broke the surface into the ninth air of the real world. She came up gasping in the way that people gasp when they had been somewhere their body was not designed to be and have just returned to somewhere it was. Cold ninth air. Real cold. Surface world cold. The cold of a city night in Onitsha with traffic sound in the distance and the sky above her with actual stars in it. She swam to the bank, pulled herself out, lay there for a long time, just breathing. She did not know how she found her way back to the road. She did not know how long she walked. She did not know what time it was when a passing commercial motorcycle driver saw a woman walking alone covered in river mud and stopped without being asked. He looked at her face. He said, "Madam, enter. I will take you home." She told him her streets. He drove. He did not ask any question. Some things a person can see in someone's face that answer every question before it is formed. It was 3 in the morning when the motorcycle stopped outside her house. The driver would not take money from her. She did not have money anyway. She had left with nothing and returned with nothing except the clothes on her back. She stood outside her own front door. She knocked lightly on the door, then her sister's voice asking, "Who is there?" "Ngozi," she answered. The door opened so fast it was as though her sister had been standing right behind it waiting. Then the house woke up. Adanna came out of her room and saw her mother standing in the doorway covered in river mud, and she made a sound that was not a sound, not a cry, not a scream, Something a 17-year-old girl makes when something she had been trying not to believe for 3 weeks is suddenly and completely reversed. She crossed the sitting room and held her mother, and for a long time, neither of them moved. Emeka came out of his room. He stood in the doorway and looked at his mother. He was 15 years old and he had spent 3 weeks being very quiet because he did not know what to do with what he was carrying. He walked across the room. He put his arm around his mother and sister, and he let himself not to be quiet anymore. Ngozi held both her children. She had thought about this moment in the cage. She had held it in her mind during every period that felt like a day in that dark place. She had promised herself she would get back to it. And here she was. Here they were, in a sitting room at 3 in the morning in Onitsha, covered in river mud, completely whole. She went to the church that Sunday, her children on either side of her. She walked in during the worship, and the congregation that turned to see who had entered went completely silent. Then someone started crying, then someone else. Then the specific sound of a room full of people who had been praying for something and are now looking at the answer walking through the door. Pastor Emmanuel stopped the worship. He looked at Ngozi. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Let us thank God." And they did for a long time. After the service, Ngozi sat with him and told him everything, all of it. He listened with his whole attention. When she finished, he said, "You know what brought you back?" She said yes. He said, "Not my prayer, not the church prayer." She looked at him. He said, "Your prayer. The prayer you were still making in that cage with nothing left to make with it. That prayer was already working before we started ours. We just joined something that was already in motion." He said, "They brought you there because your prayer was destroying them. They kept you there trying to stop it. They let you go because it was not stopping." He said, "Ngozi, they could not take your freedom. They could take your comfort. They could take your time. But they could not take what was inside you." He said, "That is the lesson of everything that happens to you. Not about envy, not about business, not about comparing yourself to your neighbor, about what happened when what is inside a person is strong enough that even the darkest place cannot extinguish it. That is what brought you home." Ngozi sat in the empty church after everyone had gone and thought about Chioma. About 3 years of lines that never made sense. About food that was fine but not better. About the specific trap of wanting badly enough to understand what someone else has that you follow them somewhere you should never go. She thought about her children at home waiting for her. She stood up. She walked out into the Sunday morning Onitsha air, full and ordinary and completely magnificent. She had a store to open on Monday morning, food to cook, her own customer to feed. For the first time in a long time, she was not thinking about Chioma's line. She was thinking about her own pot, about how it smelled when the pepper hit the hot oil just right, about her egusi soup that her regulars had been asking about for years, which she had never been able to explain except to say, "I just cook it with everything I have." She walked home. Through the Sunday morning streets of Onitsha, alive, whole, and finally completely at peace with exactly what she had. They say Chioma's store was never seen again after that Saturday. The space where it had stood for 3 years was just empty the following Monday morning, as though it had never existed, as though nothing had ever stood there. The traders on Okafor Lane noticed. They talked about it for a week. Then the street moved on the way streets move on, because life does not pause for the space left by things that were never real. But Ngozi's store was there. Monday morning, 7 o'clock. Her pot on fire, her fresh ground pepper, her neat handwriting on the menu board, and something else that was there that morning and every morning after. Not a line of customer bewitched into coming. Not supernatural assistants making her food irresistible. Just Ngozi, cooking with everything she had, the way she had always cooked, and slowly her own customer finding their way back. one by one, the way real things build, not all at once, faithfully, consistently, day by day. This has been Whispers of the Forbidden, where some stories were never meant to be told but needed to be.